Okay, here's a couple questions about duty and delight and how they go together. I'm going to summarize two questions here. Really, the question is, what is the relationship between duty and delight, and how do you propose to ensure that obeying God's law becomes delight? Okay, so the first, probably the best way to approach this problem or this question is to recognize that in a fallen world, there will oftentimes be a delay, a gap between the duty and the delight. It's not going to be instantaneous. Sometimes it will be weeks, months, years, and sometimes it will never even happen in your lifetime. Um, but there will always be, but that connection always is unbreakable. That when we obey God, the delight will always follow. It's just a matter of time. And the best way to illustrate this is perhaps um, Hebrews chapter 12. So this is after the great um, faith chapter where we learn about all these heroes of the faith, and then at the very end of Hebrews chapter 12, it says, or sorry, at the beginning of chapter 12, he says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a crowd of witnesses, all these people who have walked before the Lord in faith, or before us in faith, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Now, does that sound like delight? To cast off all these things and run with endurance. I mean, there's a charge there, there's a duty there to do that. Well, Jesus is going to help us with his example. Look at his example. Looking to Jesus, the founder and the perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Now, let me ask you, in that moment, do you think it was a delight for Jesus to go to the cross? Oh, sweating great drops of blood in the Garden of Gethsemane. My God, why have you forsaken me? I mean, this was difficult. There is not an event in the history of the world more difficult than when Jesus endured on the cross. That was not delightful in one sense, physically, as a human. But you know what? In another sense, it was because Jesus knew he was obeying the Father. Jesus knew, he knew that his act of obedience in going to the cross was a delight to the Father's eyes. And so it's a nuanced answer, isn't it? Because duty and delight is instantaneous to the one who has the Spirit of God living in us, because we know that as we obey, we are bringing our Father joy. And when we bring our Father joy, it brings us joy right away when we know that's happening. If we're walking according to the Spirit, that's always the case. So there's an instantaneous peace. There's also a delayed peace, like in the case of Jesus, right? He had to go to the cross, he had to suffer, but then, like the end of Philippians chapter 2, he was exalted. He was exalted to the right hand of the throne of God. And every knee is going to bow and every tongue is going to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father, right? That's what we're all going to say one day. So there's a delay in that part of the equation. So I encourage you to think about all obedience to God in those two ways. We have an instantaneous um, way in which we are rewarded right away by obeying the Father, but because of this sinful world, sometimes there's a delay in the second part of that equation. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of help.